Um, 7 years ago, I had a spiritual consultation with a young Black woman in Canada whose beliefs really don't quite line up with my own, but she has some ability in her area of expertise, as far as giving people readings. And she directed me to a website on name numerology, but it goes much deeper and is more accurate and detailed than what you would typically see on a standard website. I saw the names of people from my past, people from my present. I looked at my own names. I looked at the, how true to life this other more detailed site actually seemed to be. And so I researched further. I found even more advanced and more impressive sources of information on balancing name with date of birth than that. And it just changed my whole worldview on myself and the people who were in my life and had been previous to that. And, I had a chance to start learning about the great power in something as simple as a name that is compatible versus a name that isn't. And, over time, I've expanded on that. And it's important, in my opinion, to do that because, even in the Bible, Ha-Adam and Ha-Ava, or referred to incorrectly as Adam and Eve, they're told to name every living thing. Okay, well, Jewish gematria, that's the practice of name numerology. And in multiple cultures, it's not solely just in Jewish Kabbalah, but in multiple cultures, whether it's Hinduism and Buddhism or Western numerology, you have the practice of balancing a name with date of birth to have a more harmonious and less chaotic expression of self and expression of destiny. And even in the New Testament, Yeshua, who's referred to as Christ, he gives all of the apostles new names, which is a typical thing when people initiate into a new religion. That's a standard practice. But if a person is not trained, is that name going to be mathematically balanced with the date of birth? And there's a strong possibility that for the apostles, their names were not balanced names. There is a possibility that maybe it wasn't because they all got tortured to death just like Yeshua. It could have been a lack of balance, or it could have just been the times they were living in, which in many ways is somewhat different from how we live now socially, but really, to be honest, not a whole lot different when you get really honest with yourself. So with that said, and even in the book of Revelation, it says that Yeshua, Christ himself, receives a new name that no one is allowed to know. And that's a common thing as well when people initiate into a new spiritual practice, where with their new spiritual name, they don't share it. But the catch, though, is it going to be a properly mathematically balanced name with the date of birth? Or even if it's an inanimate object, a city, a state, or a place, is the name going to be balanced with the date it was created? So with that said, I decided to take a look at some of the names that were allegedly my past life names And what I noticed is that those names are actually extremely compatible with the birth date that I have now. You know, those names are actually very much in line to a very great extent with who I am now. When I look at the descriptions for the personalities, the tendencies, and the destinies manifested by my old name, but as they appear combined with my current date of birth, there's just so much harmony and compatibility there with my alleged pre-birth names from two specific ancient cultures. And looking at this, it gave me a chance to look at where I went right in those two specific alleged previous incarnations. Where did I go right? And it gives me a tiny hint at where I maybe might have gone wrong. And, you know, in one incarnation specifically, you know, I noticed that some of the issues I may have had was scattering efforts across too many tasks, problems with completing tasks, you know, being a people pleaser, always trying to make everybody happy. Some issues I may have had in one of those specific previous incarnations would have been a tendency to avoid conflict and to just immerse myself into books and writing, to try, instead of facing problems, instead of facing conflict, instead of facing issues, just withdrawing from society and spending more time outdoors or spending more time in books or writing novels or writing journals as a stress response. And in the descriptions of how my alleged previous life names line up with my current date of birth, I can actually clearly and concisely see how so much of my alleged previous self was being accurately expressed in some of the things that I allegedly wrote in the past. And one thing I noticed is that, you know, my biggest mistake, alleged previous mistakes is, again, it was difficulty completing tasks, spreading my efforts out across too many different things, people pleasing, being easily influenced, not standing up to conflict, avoiding problems, immersing into time outdoors, immersing into books and writing. This was the real me, allegedly in specific previous lifetimes. But when I look at people today who write and speak and talk about the alleged old previous me, and what I realize is they're giving credit to a narcissist for a lot of good things that I pioneered, allegedly, and basically worshiping males. And you know, and male worship is especially a big problem in Black culture, because that helps more Black men to have a more narcissistic mode of thinking and being. But I noticed that a lot of occultists and spiritual workers who seem to have a problem with me, even though they don't really know me and never met me, and this is something I've encountered in multiple different states, where they would target me for specific types of things, or just blatantly ignore me when I'm trying to talk about something important. What I've noticed is that I think they probably know that the old me was pioneering things and not getting credit for it at all. I think on some level, they probably know that the old me was submitting to one or more narcissists and not standing up to problems and just spending time out in nature or spending time writing books and reading things instead of facing the ugly reality in front of me. They probably are aware that that was the old me and they don't fucking care. Instead, certain occultists, I think I think some of them kind of want to label me as irrelevant, optional, and unnecessary. Because, for one, in Black culture, you're just automatically optional and of lower value and lower status anyway if you're a woman. And there are some Black people who are trying to change that right now, and then there's others who are not. And so part of it is a gender thing. Another thing is analyzed the names and titles for some of the African gods. And when I analyzed the names and titles for some of the African gods, what I realized is that it confirmed a lot of what I already suspected about them. When I analyzed a specific title over a specific group of African gods that I'm not going to say right now, just for the sake of, not getting my video flagged and not drawing in a lot of excess drama. I'm going to say that one particular group of African gods, when I analyzed their names, their title over the whole group, what I saw was a tendency to want to strive for power and strive for authority, even though they have a tendency to act first and think about it later. What I noticed is in the spelling of the title over that particular group of African gods and in the spelling of a lot of the people's names from their culture, I noticed a reinforcing of that same kind of energy of wanting power, competing for power, whether politically or not, but they got a tendency to act first and think about it later. And it's like a lot of what they promote across all Black cultures all over the world, this particular group of people and particular group of gods, they're very strong in that energy of acting first and thinking about it later, like right in the lifestyle, the political propaganda that they have at work, among their 3 million white followers and among their Black American followers and Caribbean, Hispanic, their African followers. I notice a lot of that same thing. Competing for power, lusting to be the big boss, the highest authority, but with that tendency to act first, think about it later. In marriage, lifestyle, and culture, tendency to act first and think about it later. Because of the energy of the titles that that group of deities is using, and the energy of a lot of their followers taking on the same characteristics because they're followers are taking on names and titles with the same nakshatras. And, I had always kind of noticed that they tend to be like that, when they're online, just pushing their propaganda every day. I kind of noticed that they tend to be like that. But when I analyzed their titles over that group of particular gods and how the personal names of a lot of their followers tend to follow that kind of same line of manifestation, that was the confirmation that my observations and my suspicions was right. Being in control, being in power, they don't really care about a whole lot outside of that. And then when I analyzed the nakshatra for the name Jesus, which is not the real name of the historical figure they're talking about, it's Yeshua. But when I analyzed the invented name from Europe, which is Jesus, I saw a line of manifestation that lines up with a lot of people's biggest complaints about the church. With the name title Jesus, what you have along with the nakshatras for the name Jesus, you have that tendency to make a lot of money and to be focused on maximizing profits. Profits. That tendency to have a really big family, even if it does not really benefit the planet or anyone else to do so. The tendency to be very, very generous with the opposite gender. But basically, like with Jesus, it's a very, very money oriented kind, and to a great extent overpopulation oriented kind of manifestation in the nakshatras of that name. And I just thought it was fascinating how analyzing the name Jesus kind of verified some of people's greatest complaints about the church. Because, the Messiah's name was Yeshua, but not Jesus. But the thing about that people tend to forget, though, is that allegedly, according to the writings, what Yeshua taught was, okay, well, yes, you are gods. This is what Yeshua taught. And basically, he's basically telling you that, yeah, although Satan is not your friend, Satan also told you the truth, is because in the New Testament, Christ himself, he says, yes, you're gods. Okay, so there you go. You had the Satan in the book of Genesis saying it, and then you had Christ in the New Testament. You had Yeshua saying it, saying you are gods. But there are standards, boundaries, and expectations that come along with the development of any soul or physically incarnated person who is on that godhood path. There are standards, boundaries, and expectations. And a lot of occultists and spiritual workers on the pagan side, they'll tell you, oh, there's no such thing as wrong answers. All answers are right. All answers are valid. All opinions are valid. But, people tend to gravitate more towards the pagan side because the pagan side is a little bit less insistent on reminding people that, hey, although you are gods in terms of development and lifestyle, there's standards, boundaries, and expectations. This is people are kind of not reminded of that quite as consistently on the pagan side, and that's why a lot of more people tend to gravitate and tend to go more towards that way sometimes. Not always, but sometimes that's the reasoning for it. Like, Why would people go to the Hebrew God who says in the book of Revelation, I will destroy them who destroy the earth? You know, in the book of Revelation, it don't say be fruitful and multiply. In the book of Revelation, it says basically you multiplied too much. There's a depopulation that might be happening. It says, I will destroy them who destroy the earth. It says, okay, here's the standards, boundaries, and expectations for the sinners and also the saints who would survive said depopulation. You know, a lot of people, they don't want to hear that. Instead, they want to go somewhere like Hinduism, and they want to hear about the 16,000 wives of Lord Krishna and about how Sita was a narcissist because her husband was a king and a god, and he rejected her because she wasn't in a harem, and he sent her away with the kids because she wasn't in a harem. So she was the narcissist because she didn't have a co-wife. And but then in Hinduism they're like, oh no, but Lord Krishna with the 16,000 wives, he's the one who's loving and all goodness and light and everything that's divine and right in the world. And that doesn't really sound like responsibility. That does not sound like structure, standards, boundaries, or expectations. That sounds like misogyny and narcissism. That, now, granted, there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of powerful tools within the Hindu Vedic system. I understand that, but I understand where some of the things promoted as good or right in the Hindu system and the African system, it's just not responsible. It's just not. I mean, I gotta be honest. And I know there's a lot of flaws in the church. And you have some leaders in the church trying to work it out. And you have others who are not. I know there's issues within Judaism, and you have some trying to work it out, others who are not. But you know, like I said, you know, the book of Revelation, there's some clearly defined standard boundaries and expectations. And for the most part, you are not going to see, 9 times out of 10, you are not going to see any pastor or any rabbi saying, yes, in the book of Revelation, it says that they're going to destroy the people who are destroying the earth. They're going to overpopulate. They're not saying be fruitful and multiply in the book of Revelation. You know, they're choosing saints and sinners who would survive it based off of clearly defined standards, boundaries, and expectations. And a lot of people may see that as a narcissistic thing, but the culture of irresponsibility and self-centeredness, that hasn't really gotten us anything except a 6th grade of mass extinction, current escalation of destabilization in the weather patterns. And a lot of people don't understand that once the polar ice caps melt, the ocean currents, a lot of the ocean currents are either going to change or disappear. And that's going to lead to an even greater massive die-off beneath the water. You know, so cleaning up the millions of miles of trash floating on top of the water in the Pacific Ocean in that garbage patch, okay, that's good. But it also doesn't address the fact that a massive amount of life would be lost beneath the water and also eventually above it too, to a greater extent, once the current ocean currents are either rerouted or gone completely when the ice is gone. You know, there's a whole domino effect of things going on right now that's really not being confronted in a more straightforward way. Because if you confront it in a more straightforward way, then people will get defensive, or they want to attack you, or they'll get emotional and don't want to listen. But we're kind of running short on time, as for our planet and for our species. And it's just amazing to me that with the destabilization of the weather patterns, the mass die off of the bees, and with only one northern white rhino being alive in Africa right now, and literally only one, in spite of all that and many other issues that are escalating, you still have so millions of people insisting that we don't have a real problem, and that it's only invented by the government or only invented by the religions for power and control. And I just think that's so evil that some people who know better, they're just pandering to people who want to believe that the earth is flat, people who want to believe that gravity is not real, pandering to people who want to believe that there are no clearly defined standards, boundaries, and expectations relevant to the godhood of human beings' development, which Yeshua Christ spoke about, and which Satan kind of alluded to as well in the book of Genesis. There's just, there's a moral obligation to correct this. And what I don't like is that instead there's been too much pandering to encourage ignorance instead of confronting it, and just letting people think that every problem that we need to face right now is just some fairy tale invented by the government, or a fairy tale invented by white supremacists, and that's not the case for everything. I could go into detail on a whole lot more things that's just downright irresponsible, but one thing I can say is that, at least in regard to my own personal self, I'm grateful to have this opportunity to see what my alleged weaknesses were under my alleged previous to specific ancient names, and how others exploited that to blame me for a lot of shit that's really not my fault, and how certain others continue to do so in some circles to this very day. I can clearly see that now. And what I'm trying to figure out is, okay, what's going to be best for me moving forward as things destabilize? What's going to be best for my children moving forward as things destabilize on a planetary level? What I'm trying to figure out is, okay, what how can I have more of a community with like-minded people who share my values? And I'm not talking about white supremacist values. I'm not talking about Hindu or Pan-African values. I'm not talking about the skewed version of Native Indigenous values that's not the same as in the past, like some people claim. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about my own personal values. People who share that, people who have similar goals and expectations and desires. What I'm trying to figure out is, how will I have a personal community with others more like myself, who are of my same ethnic background and who have a vested interest in the continuation of my individual ethnic bloodline. And by my ethnic bloodline, I don't mean pure African, because all of 100% of my ancestors, they were not all from Africa. Some were, but not all of my Black ancestors was African. All these pyramids, these 70 pyramids in Ohio, the pyramids in South America, some of my Black ancestors built those. But there was a genetic divergence from Africa because my ancestors made the decisions that most Africans to this day are still not willing to make. And it shows in the rapid depletion of their topsoils and the rapid depletion of the nutrition in it. It shows in all of the northern white rhinos being extinct, literally right now, except for just one. With that said, my ancestors made the choices as far as their selective breeding practices that most Africans to this day still are not willing to make. So that's the difference there. Like, my ancestors said, yeah, we're going to make XYZ changes. Whereas in Africa, they're like, no. And I come from 4 different native, indigenous American tribes, and I have some Italian, Portuguese, and Asiatic ancestry as well. And Middle Eastern. I come from a diverse background. But with that said, when I say that I hope to create a personal community of people who come from an ethnic background similar to my own, I understand that is a basic part of human existence. I understand that is part of having a normal, balanced, healthy life. That's part of having a family. That's part of having community. And what I noticed is that with other people who want to be white supremacists, they're not okay with that. Even though I am in the land of my ancestors and I am in a territory where the Black ones built 70 pyramids, I'm on a continent where my Asiatic ancestors had several tribes as well. I am home. And what I noticed is some white supremacists who don't want me to have anything, it's like their attitude is, oh, why can't you just go somewhere else? And I'm like, okay, my people of both races have lived here for more than 50,000 years. So I'm like, what do you mean? I'll be thinking to myself, what do you mean go somewhere else? We got all these pyramids in North and South America. So some of my Black ancestors, they were already here before they brought all these Africans who did not change their selective breeding practices because in response to drought conditions. I already had people here. They made changes in response to drought conditions and other issues they caused by cutting down too many trees to build stone cities. They changed before leaving the South American continent, before coming up here. They figured out where they went wrong. And I don't think it's okay to be replacing us with people who did not make the changes in selective breeding practices that our ancestors made. I don't agree with peers from my ethnic background, the ones who either don't know that or they do know it and they don't fucking care. So in the name of having a healthy, well-balanced, normal life, I do hope to find other people who have an ethnic background similar to my own and to have a family and community practice and lifestyle with like-minded people of similar background similar to myself. But I don't know how or where that maybe might become possible. I don't know. I haven't figured that out yet because things they're looking pretty bad right now. And I know there are a lot of white supremacists and a lot of Pan Africans and a lot of reservation Indians and a lot of Mexicans, like they see it as not okay for someone like me to have that, because their attitude is like, oh, you got to be unapologetically sold out on my way or you got to be gone. And that's just a very narcissistic way of looking at things. You know, I don't have to be to give automatic submission and automatic obedience and deference to toxic white supremacy. I don't have to be unapologetically African. I don't have to say that only the Black Pyramid builders were here and no one else deserves to be here. I don't have to promote the false idea that only the Asiatic descendant tribes have been here for thousands of years and no one else. And that's bullshit. And I don't have to promote that idea. I don't have to be unapologetically sold out on other groups of people who's looking at me like I shouldn't be here and trying to blame me for shit that's really not my fault. I do not have to bow to that. But what I can do is remove myself from certain situations, reevaluate my life, and reevaluate what I'm doing in my physical life, reevaluate what I'm doing in my spiritual life, and continue my effort to try to figure out, okay, well, what's the best way forward for me and my bloodline as things destabilize? This is what I'm trying to figure out. Because it's not as simple or straightforward as a lot of people think. You know, that's how people, they get stuck in the same recurring issues over and over again. And even when you look at the nakshatras for names and titles like Africa, African American, and Black, when you look at the nakshatras for those names, it becomes pretty goddamn obvious what's really wrong and why no one has succeeded in making a real change up to this point. But that's another story for another day that I'm probably not going to put on YouTube, because I'm not in a position to get Africans or Native Americans to adopt names for their continents, their families, or their personal selves that's going to get them to manifest their personality and destiny in a better way. I'm not in a position to encourage Black people or Native American people to do that. I'm not in a position to encourage anyone to do that. I'm not in a position to make anyone do that. I'm not in a position to convince them. The only thing I'm in a position for right now is to just remove myself from certain types of social circles, environments, and spaces, and to continue learning, reevaluating, and trying to figure out what's the best way forward for me and what's the best way forward for my bloodline. And maybe I might succeed, maybe I might fail, but there's always the hope of success and of the hope of moving forward in a better way. So, I feel like I've really gotten a lot out of this opportunity to look at my alleged past weaknesses and how others took advantage of that and got all the credit for my alleged past pioneering, while also placing the blame for a lot of shit that's really not my fault. on my alleged past self. I'm not just some narcissist who needs to be ignored and starved out. I'm just a person who in the past got overridden and just didn't stand up for what was right and just hid away writing books and shit instead of confronting problems. I was not a focused person. I was a people pleaser. That's allegedly who I was. And what I need to figure out now is how can I express myself as someone who stands up against problems? How can I express myself as someone who completes tasks instead of scattering my efforts across way too many things? How can I establish a more balanced home and community life and also international life or awareness? How can I kind of get free from serving people who didn't give a shit about me and who really only can care about being in control and who are living under a strong manifestation of acting first and thinking about it later and overpopulating through the manifestation of their white name or their black name or whatever name, or their Mexican name, whatever. How can I get free from having to be in service to some ways of thinking and ways of being that I really don't agree with and that really probably didn't benefit me that much in the past and maybe does not benefit me so much now? I'm looking for answers, and I'm understanding that there's people all on all sides of the equation who maybe might not want me to have the answers because their only agenda sometimes is just having all of the control. And I'm not the one with all of the money and the control. I wasn't born into no richness and affluence. I'm not the one promoting all the fucking narcissism here. I just was a very weak person, even though occultists maybe perceive me as someone having or having had in the past certain. Well, anyway, I guess I've just said enough. The main thing is just what is figuring out what my new path is going to be, and the hope of succeeding at that for myself and for my bloodline versus just I have no intent to just accept defeat, isolation, and failure and submission to toxicity. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to submit to being blamed directly or indirectly by occultists for shit that's not my fault. I'm not the one who needs to be starved out and ignored and isolated. For some of these occultists, they've told me to my face what they are and what they're trying to do. And I'm not saying all occultists are evil. I'm not saying all Christians and Jews are evil either. But I'm just saying, well, damn, haven't you noticed that all this horrific mess that's unfolding right now, my thinking is, haven't you noticed that you did this shit by yourself? I didn't do that. You did that shit by yourself. But that's, all I can really focus on right now is just correcting my own self and trying to figure out, okay, well, what can I contribute to this world?